So just for info, I'm still waiting a little bit because I still keep receiving the invitations, but we might start in 2-3 minutes.
It's really fascinating to see such international representation at this morning's plenary and then at this session. So thank you to everyone who has joined. We have 35 people now. I think, Alexander, you can take it away.
Okay, so I just let in the last people there, and I think we can begin. So thanks everyone for coming. My name is Alexander. I will be your tech support for today's conference. I'm joined with Natalia as well, who will also be tech support. But just to quickly introduce, we're here today to see the film screening of Diamond Boys by Jeremy McMullin, who's here with us. So the presentation will be in this format. We'll start with maybe a couple words by Jeremy McMullin, then we see the presentation of the film. And after that, there will be a Q&A session. So don't hesitate during the course of the film or whenever you want to add your questions in the text in the chat box, and we'll then be giving the questions. So without further ado, please, Jeremy McMullin, I will give the word to you.
Thanks, Alexander. Thanks, Natalia, for the support. Thanks to David and Carl and the other conference organizers for screening Diamond Boys at this event, and for the very prime position right after the plenary. So excited to take part. Just wish it could have been in person, but really great to see some familiar names in the audience as well. And thanks to everyone who's joined in. So I made this film in 2019 as part of a short documentary series on everyday peacebuilding actors, processes, dilemmas in Liberia. As part of my reflection on how peacebuilding is an ongoing labor that often involves work that doesn't get seen as peacebuilding. So some of the films might explore work that more easily passes into view and gets recognized as peacebuilding work. For example, a short film I have on the Peace Hut women's activists in Liberia. But with Diamond Boys, I wanted to do something a little bit different and explore the ways in which livelihood and knowledge, that's sectoral knowledge, and also the relationality that exists between friends and colleagues in a sector that is so associated with conflict in Liberia, specifically in West Africa more generally, how those things, how knowledge of a sector, how friendship can impact on and also make visible the everyday maneuvers that are also peacebuilding work. And in this case, and luckily for me and the conference themes, that also implicate that work in terms of the environment. So here we have two veteran miners who are really the opposite of Diamond Boys, who are the entree workers, younger, but who both started from that position many, many years ago, long before even the 1980 conflict occurred in Liberia. So it was really fascinating to me to hear these two older gentlemen narrate a life in a sector that a lot of us think we know, at least vis-a-vis its impact on war. So I was interested in thinking about what happens to our knowledge and our thinking about peace building if we let natural resource work be a little bit displaced from its usual position as financing war. And what if we instead ask about the impact of war on diamond, not just diamond mining, but on diamond miners themselves? What if we also extend our gaze beyond the immediate impacts of war to also take in the peace-building present and the peace-building future, and how those are not smooth temporal processes either. About how we as scholars and practitioners increasingly understand that successful peace-building is dialogic and relational, but we don't often get to see storytelling and friendships, collegiality and sectoral knowledge work on natural resource extraction as part of the stories that we tell about peace. So at Diamond Boys, I hope to capture the arc of these two joyful, fascinating, knowledgeable lives spent in a very unforgiving, volatile sector by showing two friends at home talking. And I was interested in seeing what happens to our assumptions about natural resources and war when we flip the direction of our gaze and center individual miners' knowledge of the sector and experience in the sector. And James and Stephen in this film, they reflect, they relate, they converse, they hint at notions of the everyday lived complexity of economics and politics, conflict and peace, and home life and the natural world. I think that a very devastating history of personal loss that they narrate, each on his own, but together, also sits alongside hope. And like I've said already, friendship and sectoral expertise then come into focus as key strategies in social navigation of war and its aftermath, where war and its effects are important, but not the only aspects that are afforded significance in their own positioning as peace-building actors in post-war Liberia. So the film's about 19 minutes, I think. So after the film, I hope there could be a bit of a discussion and robust Q&A. I'd be happy to field questions about some of the sectoral dynamics that don't come across in the film, but that I've uncovered through additional interviews with artisanal miners. Could talk about why it is that miners still do the work despite the obstacles that they narrate, and despite the impossibilities of thriving and surviving in the sector. Why is it still work that is done? And could also comment on some of the other conference themes, anything that's on your mind really. And that could also have to do with the ethics or the mechanics of filmmaking as an academic output or as a storytelling modality. So I hope that all of those things will be within bounds as discussion items, and that this will maybe spark some curiosities or questions from you. So now's the hard part where I just switch to share my screen, and we'll do that now.
I'm very sorry. I don't think I can hear.
What's up?
Was there sound in the beginning? Because I don't think we can hear directly.
You can't hear the sound? What about now?
Try.
Okay, now it's all good. Now it's all good.
I'm a miner. Doing the, I was a demo boy before. Be doing the work until I become a miner. The mining, we know the mining. As for me, I know the mining. I tell you the time I start the mining. I started the mining in 1966. Dama boy, the one that have no mining claim for himself, work for people. We call them Dama boys. They work for minor. Men who go and take in lesson mine and take.
Hey, Jeremy, could we pause the video, please? And let's try and reshare it.
Okay, sure. Sorry about that.
Well, no, not your problem. I think many people can't see it.
Should I start it over? Or just play from the same spot?
I think, could you unshare your screen and then maybe Natalia, if she has the video pulled up? I think that might be able to work. Okay. And we'll restart it.
Okay, yep. Cool.
Can we get a unmute from people in the audience if you can see the screen now, please? Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone. And if the audio doesn't work, we can try again. Thank you, everyone, for your patience with the technical. So Natalia, I think you have to unplug your headphones.
Faut que tu unplugs.
Sorry, guys, could you not hear?
We can't hear. So if you could unplug your headphones, please, that would be great.
Oh, okay.
We know the money. As for me,
Very
the money.
I'll start from the start.
James F. Kamano, Kisiba tribe. I'm a minor. Doing the, I was a demo boy before. Be doing the work until I become a minor. The mining, we know the mining. As for me, I know the mining. I tell you the time I start the mining. I started the mining in 1966. Damo boy, the one that have no mining claim for himself, work for people. We call them Damo boys. They work for miner. Men who go and take in lesson mine, take license, work for them. When you find a place, if you see a sample, good sample, that you know that you can get damo there, then you get one or two pieces, you say, oh, I think I can able to get damo here. You go and go take the money license. You get the clearance from the money agent. You carry the clearance in town to lend some money and get your license. Then you can employ your boys. You start working. That one, the local money.
My name is Steven. It's Mana. Started money in 1973. Any place you find this one and pay Damo air. Beside this one, you can't see Damo. Why that my hand war? My hand, the water. That's called the site. control trouble. And they need the crab, you wash it, then this is a sample for Damo.
Because Damos have more money. Damo have more money. I was working for a company. In 1965, we building the hydro. I was working on the hydro. We worked on the hydro 1965. Then one of my friends come from Wiswa. He came. I was making for 2 weeks. Then he said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm working for a company. Oh, I said, but I'm making my money. He said, how are you making? I said, I'm making $25 for 2 weeks. So he said, why you get? I said, well, man, I'm making money. Oh. I said, the other time they raise me up, I'm getting $25. I may take $200 US. You get me? He said, put it on your pocket first. I said, you don't go steal people money and can't give it to me. I don't want it. He take 2 pieces of diamond, he showed it to me. He put it in my hand. He said that this thing give me the money. What? He said, but I want for me and you to go there so you can go see the place. That one there, that 1966 now. So he came. We went there. We start washing the ground. The ground that he left there. We start washing the ground, start cutting the dam. Start cutting the dam. That time the dam was planted on Lofa. Lofa now Lofa get dam. But the work on Lofa now, only machines can do it. You can't do it with local shovel. You will not do nothing. You will not do nothing good. Only Google machine can do it now. But that time, we do it with shovel. Get money.
Okay, the mining business, how the war got hard and the war of fighting, people are hijack the people mining crane to work by force. So that's no mining chair inside. They don't affect more mining crane.
Oh, the war? Yeah, oh, the war damaged us too bad. The war damaged us. The war damaged us. The war came in Liberia. The damo was here. The damo here, even now the damo here. But the war damaged all the Google people that used to help us to do the damo work that we can get money. And the company then that came here that used to help us to get money, the war damaged everything. And the people were scared to go. The people were scared to go. So we remaining poor.
So during the war, when you were mining, did you support the rebel directly with some of your diamond to take it from the war?
That time in the war, no support the rebel that need to work by themselves, because no control.
There's no control.
The Yirimo used to ask me for diamond. When you don't do it, they will take everything from you. They ask you for diamond to give it to them so they can buy an ammo. So they can buy ammo. We used to collect diamond here in the town here. We all that doing diamond business here, we used to collect diamond. Sometimes two pieces, one pieces. But you don't give 50 points. Sometimes 1 carat, 50 points, sometimes 2 carat. Correct that one. Correct it from you compare. That one that's stealing. You compare, they will take it from you. So they can go buy ammo for them to come for it. That time, my son ran away from here. He went way to Nimba. That's how we're living here. We're living by them now. We're living in their hands. We're not living by ourselves.
Because if you're living by yourself, they can't force you to say, give your property to me by force. No.
If you say your son went to Nima, was it that you were afraid so the rebel can take your son away? That's why he went to Nima?
I was afraid because the boy going to school, learn good. The boy is sound. He's smart. So I afraid when he left from here, said I was afraid. In fact, every time he should be thinking for him about his business, how he living. But thank God, after the war, he came and meet me. It was all right. I tell God, thank you. My 6 children died in this war. 6 here. During the 9-month period, 9 months, no food, hunger. You can see him being dry. You see the bone, you can check the bone. No food. When your child tell you, say, Papa, I want to eat rest. That one forget about that one, coming down. That one with that. 6 children die in my hand with my wife. My wife, the rebel, they beat my wife here. Kick my woman stomach. My woman belly will kick my woman's stomach. The 2 babies die in her stomach. They die. We bury her right behind them. The same way they met. The woman died.
No, no, woman died. No. So you're rebel. You're prende. You're operation. You die. An operation. Monrovia. Okay, 8 children. 8 children. Okay, 2 in Monrovia. You don't want to send the refugee camp to Sierra Leone. In the refugee camp. They're now already in Monrovia now.
After the war, people start coming, but not too good, not too well. The one company king, they call him man. I know what they call him man. He came in Sakitan area. The man, he took our claim. He said it will work on the claim. I think about 2 years, he left. He didn't even bring a big good machine there. He told people to do certain prospecting with show.
After the war, let's combat the warfare war.
Yeah.
The boys for the war. In the mining area.
Yeah. Yes.
What has it cost to the mine?
The king in the mine. It caused some of them caused damage for us because some of them don't want to work. They're used to the looting, they're not used to hard work. But the king in the mine now, they start stealing from us. When you pull your shovel down, they take it, they go sell it. They don't want to do hard work. Until when we had this woman, Ellen, sit down, then go business open. Then everybody jump behind go. Until now, you can't have no boys to work for Diamond. Only one places you can get boys to work for Diamond, or everybody jump behind go. And we have more places to have Diamond. Yes. I have a mining claim on Sakitan Road. They call the place Bongo Village. I built a house there, 3 room, 2 piazza. I had a mining claim there, but no help. We don't have nobody to help us. The place have money, but there's deep money. We only work there for a caterpillar or buy hoe. We all die, you will not get the money. We want to do the Dama work. And we stay in Dama until we get all of this. Look at me. I know being lucky to become a money man in a diamond. Or because all the Google places where I know, you can't do it with small shovel, no. You gotta do it with machines.
What are some of the hard times you face as a man?
As man and supporting, no support, no machine. I need machine, I need a support. Machine to pump water. No. I was into the place, but not full. I wasn't yesterday. I brought this one to the place. I still wasn't. Because no job, no business.
But the only thing that giving us hard time in this country, some of us will know more places to work, but we don't have the finance. We don't have no money to help ourselves. No supporter. If you don't have supporter, you will not work. The dam that in Liberia, we never even dig half. Some white people came long years ago, they told us that we have the same camelets than silent people used to have. We have more camelets in Liberia. We have bigger camele in Liberia that South Africa been having before. They told us. But we never have people to do that work.
You know, you have to know the hard time too much. The hard time plenty. The hard. You know, we are not different beside the money. And now not support nothing.
Yeah, that's why I say you must carry the story to your baby people, to your millionaires,
To the millionaires.
to the millionaires, the billionaires, so they can help us. You tell them, say one old man there, he want to do the work, he get good money clean, but he don't have no work, he don't have nobody to help. He want us to make contact for him so he can get company, so the company can do his work on his money clean. We company come here, they can put us on percentage. And because they brought all their equipment, when you bring all your equipment, we sit down, we talk, we make what the percentage that you give me, we talk. I show you my working place, we work.
Thanks for watching.
Jeremy, that was a fascinating film. Thank you for going into the field and for putting this together for all of us. We'd really like to invite everyone here to turn on their cameras, to unmute themselves, and to ask Jeremy any questions or thoughts that you may have. So the floor is completely open. Mahala Kamala, please, after you, if you have a question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mahala Kamala. I'm from Liberia. And I want to say thank you to Jeremy for sharing this film to us today. And currently, I'm in Monrovia County, and I can relate to some of the messages that were given in the film. You know, the civil crisis really affected Liberia, and Liberia is blessed with abundant natural resources. And some of the war-affected people had to go through a lot, and even now they are having challenges recovering from the war, because some people lost their family, some people lost their kids, some people lost their jobs, and you will find that we have a lot of resources. We have diamond, we have gold, like in Cocoa County. There's a mining site that in Bankstown. You have a lot of people mining. They have restriction. They don't have equipment. They use physical labor to actually work. So it's a serious challenge. So in that, we actually need training in that area. We need research, more education, more awareness, so that people can be mindful, because some of them lost their life due to mining. Because if you dig a very deep hole and go into it without equipment, without any PPEs, it's a serious danger for them. So I want to say thank you to Jeremy for putting this up, and I hope that there'll be more research done in this area. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Mahala. Yeah, great to hear from you. Really important comments. And yeah, I tried to get to Vonjama a couple months ago, but the conditions of the road prevented me. But it's really nice to hear that some of the challenges that James and Stephen narrate kind of resonate based on your own knowledge of the sector as well. So cheers for that.
Ms. Bright, if you want to speak next, please go ahead.
Hi, Jeremy. My name is Chantal Bright, and I am a PhD candidate. My research is further connecting women, water, and peace in Liberia. I am a Liberian American. So my question is, what were your initial objectives in going into this, making this film when you were going in? Did you have set out what you planned on doing? How did this go about?
Thanks, Chantal. This is maybe of the short film series that forms Liberia Legacies of Peace. This is maybe the most serendipitous of the films. So my main area of interest in Liberia is in the motorcycle taxi sector. So my research background going back quite a few years is on reintegration of ex-combatant and conflict-affected youth. As an American Liberian, you probably know that the motorcycle taxi sector in Liberia is a massive employer of conflict-affected youth, that it has a complicated history that's also tied up with the reintegration of ex-combatants, and was a sector that initially and still to this day has significant ex-combatant representation at the parking station level and in union politics. So the filming objectives were mainly around going in and telling the stories of the cyclists. And that's still something that I'm very involved with, and could talk to you offline or others later if there's time or interest. But it happened that, as so often happens, especially as a first-time filmmaker going in and doing this series of projects, you kind of need your side hustle. And that for me, associated with this funding, was also to do a report for the United Nations DDR section on the legacies of the DDRR. And they had specific questions that were also about ex-combatants in mining areas. So we made a point of going to Western Liberia to meet with miners to ask them their experiences of the war, of how the war impacted on their claims and on their livelihood, and on their own impressions about whether this is still a sector in which ex-combatants pose a threat or play an outsized role that impacts negatively on them, or maybe also positively. We heard James also talk about the shortage of labor and the shortage of youth that are able to do this work. So that's the genesis of this particular project, and I didn't initially conceptualize it as a film, and was just going to feed into a policy report that I then did write. But later, because of this work, and largely inspired by this conversation, that we just really liked the idea of two veterans sharing their knowledge and experiences in a way that maybe slightly challenges how it is that we tend to see the legacy of conflict, and how peace building and the natural resource sector play into that. So that, combined with some of the other side interviews that we had done associated more on the UN report side of the project, inspired my cinematographer and I to conceptualize shorter films that took a look at different kinds of peace building actors. So if there was an objective in terms of the film itself, it really did start from a vantage point of wanting to displace who gets seen as contributing to peace, and what peace building labor is, and why it is labor, why it is hard work and unfinished work. And those kind of adjectives are what I mean when I think about peace building as laborious. And I think for some of the reasons that also Mahava articulated, we see the ongoing challenges and the continuities between conflict and so-called peace that don't map neatly onto the usual narratives of diamond mining and conflict, that aren't just about the financing of war and removing that financing of war. It was interesting to me that became just one small part of James's story or Saw Stevens' story, and that instead we see a lot of serious challenges that are environmental challenges, that are land dispute challenges, that are challenges of governance, of not feeling that indigenous and artisanal miners have a voice and have access, even though instruments guarantee them access. So the objective was that the notion of the everyday could start to displace some of those old notions of what the impacts of natural resources on war are, and how varied and multiple and contingent these other challenges that miners face are, but how their livelihood contributions are conceptualized for them as ways of contributing to peace, and about how they navigate those challenges, I think, are integral to understanding what peace building is, like what it looks like. So hopefully, so that was the objective. Whether I succeeded, I guess, is up to you and other audience members. But that's what I set out to do in deciding that kind of conversation was a conversation that I wanted to not just report on in a UN report that maybe 6 people would read, but a film that maybe, if I'm lucky, a few hundred people will see. So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Bryant, for the question. Roger Mark, after you, please.
Thanks very much. So really glad to see the film. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of women in the sector, women miners, and the degree to which they're able to be involved in the peace building efforts.
Yeah, of course. Women are in the sector. That I didn't interview any women in the sector, although we asked. So that might be a function of where I was, but also if could be a function of a lot of things. But women, so it's hard for me to just I don't want to speculate, and this isn't my main area of expertise in terms of the sector itself. I can only report what my own participants would tell me. But what I liked about the way that James and Stephen talked about their life, including women in their life, is that the impact that the war had on women's presences and absences, suffering and contributions, is also very different from the stories that tend to be told about war, peace building, and natural resources. or maybe about looting, the threats from ex-combatants, the violence of war in terms of direct violence at the barrel of the gun. I like that they, in their own way, displace and gender those violences and their ongoing effects in the peace-building present by narrating the loss and the absence of their wives due to very different kinds of violences that occur both because of the precarity of the sector and the violence of war. So particularly around malnutrition, around access to healthcare, and around lacking access to resources that would be able to provide and keep people alive, and the horrific choices that are then also made about feeding children, in which children survive, and how to make frantic and difficult decisions alongside their partners when they were alive about how to keep children and communities safe. From there, I'd maybe defer more to Mahava's comments about some of the dangers involved, but also about why it is that some women continue to see opportunities in the sector. And that has to do with women's claims in the communities of equal status in terms of indigenous and artisanal rights to access claims. And sometimes that has to do with how claims are passed down. So I know a little bit about that, about how claims are financed and kept up even when the claims themselves are inactive. So that puts big burdens, that puts a big burden on women as well to keep a claim active, and involves a lot of associated labor in order to do side projects, subsistence living, in order to keep claims. So the basic background of mining claims, for example, and forgive me if I'm speaking to a room of people that are way more expert than I, but that individuals in Liberia have to pay $150 per year to maintain the claim. If they don't pay that, then there's a 3-month grace period in which they receive warnings from the government, and then the government can just give the claim away to someone else. But, and so already that $150 is incredibly difficult for miners that are not making money from that claim because of the challenges that James and Stephen narrate about lack of access to machinery, labor, and capital, that then they're having to somehow make $150, which is way above what the median income would be in that particular area in Western Liberia, and in addition to survival, providing for families. So families, whether they're are having to take on additional roles. In the case of the farmers that I interviewed, those are usually cassava farming, rice farming, and some small scale groundnut farming to sell to survive. Beyond that, if they want the claim to be productive, then that involves a $4,000 payment that provides for a 6-month license. And on top of that, $1,000 a day for the equipment, for the heavy equipment. And none of those costs include the cost of labor and fuel plus transportation. So the numerous ways in which married women or single women who might feel pressure or a financial need to keep up the claim are also facing all of those same pressures, in addition to the safety challenges that Mahava also articulated. So apologies for my gender blind spots in terms of that knowledge, and I see them. But what I hope to do with the film, at least, is in telling the story centered on 2 men, that the women's presences and absences and the impacts also become visible in some small ways.
Roger Mark, thank you for that question. I thought that was a very powerful moment in the film when James and Stephen talked about the loss of their wives. I'd like to turn to Jessica, please.
Hello, my name is Jessica Jonathan, and I also work with a focus on Liberia and with natural management of resources, and especially with a focus on business. So I think this was really interesting to watch, and I wanted to ask you, Jeremy, in your research and in your interviews, you talked first about that you mainly work with the reintegration of ex-combatants in the motorcycle taxi sector, and that has been a part of, an important part of the peace building and providing livelihood for ex-combatants. And here the mining sector was also listed as a little bit of a more problematic sector. I wanted to ask if you have seen any other sector related to natural resources that have been a kind of successful reintegration sector for ex-combatants and as part of like larger peace building efforts.
Ooh, success. Success,
or at least, success was maybe too positive of a word. But
I guess without going and falling back on a 10-minute academic problematization of the idea of success vis-a-vis reintegration, I would mainly say the motorcycling sector is hands down the most successful in terms of providing employment for the most conflict affected and ex-combatant youth, and providing what they describe as a stepping stone to get to what they call the next level, in terms of being able to survive and have enough to provide for themselves and their families, start homes, and put themselves, their children, and their partners through school. So not all motorcyclists succeed at the same level, but if I compare that to interviews with ex-combatants and conflict-affected youth in the mining sector, there doesn't seem to be any comparison in terms of where and how individuals are able to save and get to that next step. Of course, both natural resource sectors and the motorcycling sector face massive safety challenges that imperil the lives of those who feel compelled to do this work. And individuals in the mining sector and in the motorcycling sector will, 95% say that it's not where they would like to be. But interestingly, those who get forced out of the motorcycle sector because their bikes are stolen or a calamity befalls them, they're injured, they can't ride anymore, often end up in the mining sector, either gold or diamonds, but more commonly gold. So, and then in terms of other sectors, what has been successful, and it really depends on depends on which level you're talking about, if we're staying just in the realm of ex-combatants. Politics has certainly been a successful sector for those who played more senior roles in some of the armed movements. Whether that's successful from the point of view of the governed is maybe a different question, but that has been a sector in which ex-combatant leaders have migrated, but also a sector, ex-combatant youth in the cycling sector perceive that as a space where they want to enter to make a difference also for the lives of those who feel trapped in that particular sector, and also to just rebut the social stigma that they face in it. So, I mean, that's my pitch for the idea of motorcycling as an integral peace building modality in Liberia. And if I think about other precarious work that young people are engaged in, it's where they locate promise. And the numbers kind of speak for themselves in terms of how many people migrate to which space.
Thank you.
Caitlin Ryan, please, after you. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry. Hi, Jeremy. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. So particularly in your second to last explanation about the kinds of costs and fees associated with keeping up claims, I think we can see the government has attempted to really formalize and regularize artisanal and small scale mining in Liberia. And I'm wondering if you can say something about how you saw participants at least implicitly discussing some sort of relationship between formality and informality. And I guess what I'm getting at here, right, are government attempts to formalize and regularize mining actually pushing some aspects of mining into more irregular and informal channels? And then what kinds of things were miners talking about needing people to bring or needing people to do that might illuminate this tension between the formal and informal? Yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, good to hear your voice too. Thanks for that. Thanks for those questions. Those questions, yeah, questions that you feel like you have really good answers to are always the best questions to receive. But so are questions that I'm less prepared at. I feel a little bit more prepared there and excited to kind of tease out some of those contradictions that you did so well in the questions themselves. So I think that it's absolutely the case that the government has created, in trying to formalize artisanal mining and regulate artisanal mining. And sometimes, you know, for our purposes with this conference, those are also environmental regulations, specifically. So one good example of these tensions between formality and informality is about environmental regulation. So to do kind of the diving, the speculation is the first step before you are able to feel like you should or even could make the investment in renting the equipment to mine the claim. You're either doing shovel speculation at the outset, but then a kind of diving bell speculation that often involves using chemicals that can pollute the water. So the government has regulated those chemicals, and then artisanal miners have then shifted the use and migrate away from more harmful chemicals towards chemicals that do not pollute the environment. So say they. I haven't run the scientific tests or know that aspect. But what they point out is that has perversely led to more incentives to informalize or bypass the government, because what they do instead is then they just regulate any use of diving bells rather than any inquiry into the specificity of the chemicals, full stop. So that drives that miners have said that drives them into more illegal or informal channels. But the second and more important dynamic is the relationships with bigger outfits, usually from Ghana, who come in to make offers to keep the claim active or to pay miners to use the claim. So because of the difficulties of the miners to raise capital within formal networks or through formal channels, they feel like they have to take in outsiders who then, and then these are very exploitative relationships. And yeah, so that's Ghanaians come in, use even heavier machines that provide even more pollution, but tend to pay bribes to the government officials to avoid being fined, whereas the artisanal miners, for using the correct chemicals, tend to be fined. So that also drives kind of that tends to or evidences informality within a governance attempt at formalizing and privileging the claims of artisanal miners. People don't want to lose their claim. The Ghanaians help them finance the claim. They can't obtain their own licenses. But the miners I interviewed said that they would vastly prefer not to accept them on their water, on their mining claims. They don't share with them. They lie about what's been found. They give a minuscule cash payment and keep the minerals to sell on at a much higher profit. And the miners also lack security. So the security that exists that is meant to look out for the interests of the miners or enforce environmental regulations actually exists to support and bolster informal and also predatory and exploitative relationships between bigger Ghanaian outfits and artisanal Liberian miners. So that's the main way that the artisanal miners themselves represent that informality within the so-called structure of formal claims gets incentivized. In terms of recommendations, they often talk about transparency and preference. So it is about indigeneity and artisanality, if that's a word, as having preference for claims, but also just compensation and access to capital. So their request is, and then from there, their point of view is that they pay tax, they pay license fees, and they pay tax on the claims, but they receive nothing that resembles, say, a subsidy that exists, say, as an American that I know exists for, say, soybean farmers, that then gets heavily subsidized and as a recognition of tax. Nothing like that exists. So what they say is that they want subsidies or access to government capital because of the successive year in, year out fees and licensing fees and taxes that they pay. That's what I can kind of haphazardly summarize from my notes, at least. How did I do?
I thought you did well. That was very informative.
Thanks, David. I'll wait for Caitlin to tell me over email or savage me over email.
Kira Tariff, please, after you.
Hi. Yes, thank you. My name is Kira Tariff, and
hi, Kira.
Hi. I work at CIPRI's climate change and risk program. But about 5 years ago, Jeremy, I was in one of your master's courses, so
hey.
Your name come up in the list of events. I'm neither an expert in Liberia or mining. My question is actually more about the DDR process and your thoughts on the kind of core assumptions that the UN's DDR programming had, especially with regards to natural resource access and use and the management of natural resources, and also whether those assumptions changed over time. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I love this topic too. We'll probably only be able to scratch the surface with time, so I'll do my best to condense something that I could probably deliver 60 minutes on. But yeah, and I like that you provided already the parameters so to stay focused on those DDR assumptions within the natural resource world. And we could look at those at in a couple of ways. One is how the peacebuilding gaze, especially that official gaze, DDR gaze, tends to only fall in a very specialized or subjective way. So in the case of Liberia, it only fell on rubber plantations, and the mining sector was escaped that gaze completely. So it was never part of programming or assumptions, which I think is always a problem when a sector that is most likely to employ very large numbers of conflict affected or ex-combatant young people, when those sectors are just left out of any planning. Or when the planning assumes, because those sectors have a dubious history vis-a-vis conflict, that they should be discouraged at all costs, which is always wishful thinking, and I think really bad planning as well, if again, that sector, especially in certain parts of the country, is likely to be the biggest magnet for any employment or survival or subsistence prospects. Then we get to the rubber plantations themselves, and this is where expectations or policies shifted over time, that initially they were off the radar and not part of original reintegration planning. But ex-combatants at a number of rubber plantations across Liberia took control. And sometimes that control was extremely unwelcome. and experienced as massively violent and exploitative by existing plantation residents. But other times it was much more complicated. The ex-combatants may have been returning to an area in which they had pre-existing family or social ties, may have even been welcomed sometimes, especially in a context where before the war, plantations, which are called plantations for a reason and might replicate some of the violences of other plantations in history, and limit the prospects, even movement and opportunities of people living on them. So the UN decided again, and I've talked in my research about how the stigmatization of ex-combatants in UN and other international planning can often create perverse incentives or bad results. And I think that was the case with the rubber plantation effort. Although they went in essentially to remove or create incentives to remove the ex-combatants who were resident on plantations, mainly through providing alternative programming. But really then in the end, it was more broader economic forces and events, and specifically the 2008 financial crisis, which led to a collapse in rubber prices, which did the most to incentivize not just ex-combatants, but many people that were engaged in the rubber sector to leave and migrate to other alternative things. But why were there bad assumptions there? What's interesting is like what we remember from DDR too, and we remember only what was done, and very rarely do we remember alternatives, and especially radical alternatives. There was a left-wing member of the transitional government that worked in the planning ministry that pushed an idea that ownership of the plantations should revert back to community members only, including ex-combatants that may have been resident or from that particular area, so that they should be carved up, that individuals should have stakes in land, should be given land as part of a reintegration process, and not just ex-combatants, but community members. Of course, what happened and what the Rubber Plantation Project was really about is reverting control back to pre-war ownership. And pre-war ownership in a Liberian context is massively, is a big problem because of the way in which it exploits and oppresses indigenous Liberians, and the way in which that control has an extremely problematic heritage and history vis-a-vis indigenous Liberians living in plantation areas. So ways in which, efforts to reintegrate ex-combatants become wrapped up in a recolonizing process to revert natural resource control back to the elites that held that control before the war started, and that was one of the underpinning reasons for the war. So it's there where I see some of the more perverse assumptions about how reintegration of ex-combatants becomes a means to less peace building, to ends that can't be called peace building ends, that can be called neoliberal ends at best, and neo-colonial ends in effect.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciated that question, just because on the topic of supporting the eradication of negative forces in a country, it's extremely important that we talk about the repatriation of ex-AGs, and then also just the effects on their dependents and the families that said ex-armed force members may have, and those relationships, as your film touched on with the two men's families. Jessica, please, after you again. Thank you.
Yeah, hi again. I have another question. Jeremy, you mentioned transparency, just compensation, and government subsidies as some of the aspects that could potentially improve the situation somewhat for minors. And I was wondering whether there is also something that is not necessarily on the government side, but rather on the business side, that could be done in terms of regulations or specific policies from the mining companies that could be used to reduce some of the negative impacts on miners.
Yeah, I was trying to review some of my interview notes frantically while you asked the question, because I remember this and I'm just not finding it because it's too disorganized. But they do talk about outside support, and I think that the problem is, I guess, how that outside support tends to come. So it's not access to capital. It's not through loans or access to credit or money to be able to speculate on their own. It's always an aggregation, almost like an aggregate land grab by companies that then ends up not just hurting the economic prospects of artisanal miners, but also displaces whole communities and produces much worse environmental impacts. So that's the outside business support tends to come in and conceptualized as now we will take over this section, we'll negotiate directly with the government, an arrangement where we then displace artisanal miners from this land, as opposed to what the miners have asked for is access to loans, so that when successful prospecting happens, or well, one, to be able to do prospecting, and which is smaller, requires less money, obviously, but then two, if that's successful, then to have access to credit and loans so that they can rent the equipment and pay for the fee, and not rely on extra legal Ghanaian companies or individuals to mine the land for them, or on what's also happened also in Western Liberia, Grand Cape Mount County in particular, businesses coming in and negotiating deals with government that are not transparent, not community approved, not in keeping with the arrangements that are meant to provide for revenue sharing at the community level, and then also ending up in mass displacement, people losing homes as well as livelihoods. So yeah, that is something that comes up a lot when in terms of solutions.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions out there?
I'll quickly share while we wait if there are any hands with the question that I asked miners: why keep the claims given these challenges? And I think this taps into kind of a couple of different issues. And they say they tend to focus on, we know this work. So again, also speaks to sectoral knowledge being represented as a peacebuilding good, and a peacebuilding good that our peacebuilding interventions ought to prioritize, rather than be set up around more securitized conceptualizations. But so we know this work, we know the minerals are there. That's something that I really liked that came across in Mahava's opening comment about, and that's a theme that comes across again and again, that there is an abundance, and that this is a governance problem and not an access problem. And the way that it's governed is also exacerbating environmental damage. And artisanal miners represent that they would be part of something that would be much more ecologically, if not sustainable, then less damaging. It mainly also goes back to precarity, because we know no other work besides mining. So also trapped. So a lack of alternatives.
On this note of sectoral knowledge, in the video, there was a brief transition in their line of work from diamond mining to gold mining. Could you explain why that happened? and what was the impact of that, if any at all?
Yeah, so they described that impact as being a labor impact, that it drove labor away. And that's labor for prospecting and also labor for security, for keeping the mines, for keeping squatters or others off the claims. Sorry. So, and what they're saying, especially in attributing it to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, is that after she came to power, then the gold, what's the word I'm looking for? When you put sanctions at Security Council level on Liberia in the gold mining sector were lifted. And so that created opportunities for that. It doesn't mean that there was no gold mining happening before those sanctions, but it did create opportunities. And in addition, it's where more investment was being channeled. And I don't know all the reasons for that in terms of why that's where the investment was as opposed to in the diamond sector, but I suspect it has a lot to do with how the minerals are mined and the business side of things. So they represent that the biggest impact on them has been then a labor shortage of individuals to assist, especially with prospecting, and who might then also be able to assist if that prospecting is successful in raising capital. But without access to those labor networks, then they also suffer.
Access to labor was one of the areas where James and Stephen talked about. They also said that they need machines, they might need financing. Malnutrition is something that you mentioned. The work is also extremely hard, so the youth at the start weren't willing to put up with that. This morning when we had the plenary session, our headline speaker was Robert Jenkins, who's the assistant to Samantha Power at USAID, and he heads up the conflict prevention and stabilization office there. He had a quote where he said that natural minerals will be one of the most important conflict drivers for our generation. I just wanted to know what are your reflections on this comment?
Yeah, he may well be right. I mean, people have been talking about this for some time, including within our field. It's no surprise, something that I already flagged up in the introduction, is that I'm a little less interested in conceptualizing natural resources as conflict drivers, and more interested in the reverse of that question in terms of the way in which conflict and ongoing conflicts in the sector impacts on those engaged in the sector. But so if they are likely to be the biggest drivers of conflict, my hope is, or I guess it's also a research challenge, is how can we generate research that looks into the myriad ways in which conflict exists at the community level as it relates to natural resource extraction, governance, and livelihood. And so what I like about the conversation that comes from James and Stephen is that it focuses our attention on those multiple ways in which conflict in a time of quote unquote peace and peace building is a form of violence, violence between squatters and miners, violence between Ghanaians and who are operating even with the consent of miners, but engaged in exploitative and predatory relationships with them and with the government. So that these are all sites of conflict. And I think it's important for research across disciplines to map and analyze that through the narratives of subjects at the grassroots level, rather than only conceptualize natural resources either as financing arms. That's one small part of the way in which they engender or are wrapped up in conflict dynamics, or that they produce environmental degradation that leads to mass displacement and unrest, which is a similar way in which conflict, natural resource, and conflict get entangled in some social scientific explanations. I would much prefer us to also include these other discussions about land, about governance, about relationality, and that will also, of course, impact on the kinds of solutions that we envision. Like, will we envision the kind of radical solutions that the former planning minister had about natural resource governance that is more equitable and livelihood supporting, quote unquote, artisanal, or other large-scale solutions that might do more environmental and livelihood damage? So that's kind of how I would see that important question about, if they drive conflict, then how do they drive conflict, and what kinds of solutions get seen or unseen, if that becomes our grounded premise.
Thanks, Jeremy. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts?
I had a thought when, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the video, when the men start to, count the number of people that they've lost, their babies, their women, and they must be in such pain. And I feel like they say it in such a normal way, as if it was normal, in this context. And can you say that this is something you've noticed, that loss and pain is normalized in this kind of context, and it's something that people have to deal with daily?
I think, yeah, I mean, first, I'm very, I don't know, I guess I'm thinking about Susan Sontag's work and regarding the pain of others, where she revises some of her initial work about, or thoughts about, being anesthetized against the trauma of pain when we witness it or hear it narrated. And her main caveat becomes, we who don't live proximate to that kind of suffering, pain, and violence are in a very privileged position when it comes to commenting on that. So I want to start by recognizing that and letting that kind of saturate any idea that we might have. From there, I don't know that the expression of that pain and loss is experienced as normal by James or by Stephen. It's set up as exceptional and as difficult and as painful. And that's signaled in kind of a different way of narration, like when James interrupts to say, ask him, interrupts the usual conversational flow. But does that mean it's common? So normalization can mean, is that a common experience? Is that a prevalent experience? Yes, because that community saw 2 decades of successive conflicts that, for all the reasons that we heard narrated, led to all of these challenges about survival, about just surviving. And then now that we're in a quote unquote peace building phase, what is survival and what does thriving mean? And what would it entail? So I don't know that I would say that it's normalized. It's because that suggests that it's not felt as pain. And I think it is. And I think that comes across, and why I think film can be a powerful way to tell peace building and conflict legacy type stories, to narrate the impacts of conflict, because it gets narrated in different ways than when we summarize it. From there, I think, but because it's prevalent and common, does that mean that there are different ways in which communities discuss it and acknowledge it? That's probably also true. But others have done very beautiful work in that kind of area already, and maybe one day I'll rise to their levels. But for now, yeah, I guess those are my main takes on how trauma gets narrated. I mean, I could close with a small. It implicates us. I don't want to by separating it, by acknowledging privilege. I don't want to suggests that when, as researchers, we go into someone's home and have these conversations, that we're not also implicated. We know from ethical approval processes that where we talk about which kinds of questions we will ask. And for this project, I didn't set out to ask people to narrate trauma from the war period. So just on the ethical approval side, and I also want to say ethical approval is very different from ethical practice. On the approval side, our protocol was that if individuals volunteered narratives about stories that were important to them that came from the war and included narrations of trauma, that we'd ask follow-up questions, and we had conversations with local partners and stakeholders about re-traumatization. And I had to have some not insignificant fights with ethical approval panels about will you offer them access to community resources for psychosocial support? So in a context where those resources don't exist, or where it would be inappropriate to promise them. But I think we're implicated in other ways too. We ask, and there's the implication that the story matters and that the story will be told. So I think the bigger ethical obligation is about how you tell the story, in what way, and how you fight to tell that to more and more people, and to what effect. So those are the bigger kind of haunting questions about doing human subject research that I think are important. So we were just back from filming to finish a long form, a feature documentary on the motorcyclists, on motorcycling as peace building in Liberia. And I just received the news 3 days ago that one of our key informants was killed in a motorcycle accident. So the way in which that was narrated, there was nothing normalized about that pain, and especially in a sector where the young men, and it's mostly young men, although there are a few young women writers, what they most narrate is how ignored, how their lives are, how disparaged they are by the outside world, but also by ordinary Liberians, how their lives don't seem to matter. So the way in which they narrated that pain to me was also as a request for the interview footage, to which they said they want to show at a funeral. And it's very moving, but that's also a big obligation too. But all I can do is report back what they said. And it just so happened that the key informant, our last interview with him, it ended with a very moving testimony that was not something I wrote or scripted, even though it could come from the funding documentation itself, about why motorcycling is a form of peace building. And their reaction on seeing that was immediately that we want to share, is it okay if we share this with the family? We want to have this played at the funeral. This can be a way in which lives can be made to have meaning. So I don't know, I haven't processed that fully from wearing an academic hat. But what that also tells me is that the ongoing violence and conflict during quote unquote peace building phases is not normal, and not experienced as normal, and is incredibly painful, and that we as researchers can't be anything but also implicated. So again, it goes back to how we do that, and how we build collaborative partnerships that are participatory and that produce or seek to generate impact beyond academic outputting, is something that I'm focused on. Yeah.
Thank you for this comment.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the discussion again, and thanks for screening the film. I really appreciate it, and I've been really inspired by some of the questions too.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for sharing that story, and my deepest sympathies to you and your team about the loss of someone who you definitely had a close relationship with after working with. Thank you for showing this film to this audience. Thank you to the 29 people still here for sticking with us to the end. We've been recording, so if at any point you want to revisit Jeremy's thoughts, we will post this on our YouTube channel. Jeremy, I leave the floor to you for any closing remarks. Thank you, sir, for joining us at this event.
Just to say thanks again for having me. I am part of another panel that will also talk about some of these connections that we've discussed today. So encourage any of you that are interested in continuing the conversation, also getting some additional perspectives, including from some Liberian partners and collaborators who are doing incredible work in the space at connecting themes of local livelihood to the natural resources, the environment, and peace building. Please do look out for that, which is on Thursday. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you there as well. And appreciate everyone that stayed and participated. And thanks again for the space.
Alexander, Natalia, and I would like to thank you all so much for joining us. Right now, in 4 minutes, is our virtual social hour. We cordially invite everyone to join, to just be able to talk and to break down some of the thoughts that have been discussed. A poster session was going on simultaneously with Jeremy's, so you can head over there. And thank you again, Jeremy, for joining us. We're extremely grateful. And
Pleasure.
Thanks to all who joined us.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
I'm sure the thank you notes will start rolling in right now, Jeremy. If you want to stick around.
I will, of course, I'll take a look and read them. And yeah, I haven't joined the social hour. Do I have to sign up for that?
Yes, here's the link.
Okay, shoot me the link and I can chill out for a little bit. And then I have to take the train back. I'm sure other people sticking around can copy and benefit from that too.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot and nice work also ironing out the technical issues with audio and visual. That was good.
It was good practice for the sessions I have tomorrow.
So yeah, cool. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you
again.
for your patience.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, really great to meet you, David, and all of you guys. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Alexander. Thanks, Natalia. All right, see you later.
Bye-bye.
Sounds
Have a
good.
evening.
Bye.